That's right behind there. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Wow, look at this full house. It's great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cara Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, which is where you are right now. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. We are here to celebrate Sangamithra Iyer's Governing Bodies, a memoir, a confluence, a watershed. Can we give a hand for She is joined tonight by Green Apple favorite and yours, Shruti Swamy. Can we get a hand for Shruti? Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you. If you need a hand with seating, if anyone needs an extra seat or anything, let me know. I'll gladly give you an assist. Thanks for joining us here in person and also online. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to a camera if you can't see what I'm waving to. We open each of our events at Green Apple with a land acknowledgement, and so, which I think is particularly prescient given today's book, but also just in general. So I would like to let you know that we are operating on unceded Watershed land, and we think that with land acknowledgement comes land action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have information about the Watershed Land Trust at the back desk, but that is but one way to participate in this project of renaturation, so that's an entry point. Ask me if you have any questions about that. Very brief business before I let these two take over. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. Photo taking, how do we feel? I'm pro. Okay. Yeah. Photos are fine. Don't take a call in the middle of the event. That's the only reason I mention it. Oh, and also the caveat is that the photos you take have to be good and flattering for our audience. There's no bad photos allowed. And if you're turning your phone off and getting comfortable, now's a great time to grab the chocolate that Sandy brought back there while you're getting comfy. You can listen to me while you go venture for some chocolate. I think now is a good time to do so you don't do it during the event. Please do check out our full calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great event season ahead of us, including the event that you are at right now, currently. That's greenapplebooks.com. See what else we have going on in the future. If you are able, please do buy books. Please do buy books from us, your hosts. We always appreciate it. We still have copies of Governing Bodies, the front register. We also have Shruti's novel at the front there as well. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books. Then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you're able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. And oh, you know what? Actually, let me give you a brief overview of what to expect. We're going to hear a bit from Governing Bodies and hear what it sounds like, I think. Yes, okay, great. And then a conversation between our authors. We might take a breath and then open up for some audience questions. So think of them as you are listening if you have anything in mind. And then we'll sign some books afterward. Sound okay? Great, thanks. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the two writers we have joining us this evening. First, Shruti Swamy is the author of the story collection A House is a Body and the novel The Archer. She's received grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, San Francisco Arts Council, and is a 2024 Rome Prize Fellow in Literature. Shruti's work has appeared in the Paris Review, McSweeney's, The Believer, and twice won the O. Henry Prize. She teaches writing with the collective The Dream Side. Let's give one more hand for Shruti Swamy. And last but most certainly not least, Sangamithra Iyer is an environmental planner, engineer, and writer. She is a recipient of the Whiting Creative Nonfiction Grant, a Café Royale Foundation Literature Grant, and a Diamond Spiel Vocal Fellowship at the New York Public Library. She is the founder of the Literary Animal Project, for which she was awarded a Culture and Animals Foundation Grant. She is visiting us from Queens, New York, where she lives with her, yay! Where she lives with her husband, Juan, and the rescued pit bull Asta. Who's not here? That's okay. Her book Governing Bodies is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Sangamithra Iyer.
car. That was wonderful. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. I think we're going to connect.
Can you guys hear me? No? Okay, yes. This is it.
Okay. Good evening, San Francisco. I am so honored to kick off the West Coast launch of my book tour, coming back to the Bay Area, coming back to Green Apple Books, and to be with Shruti in conversation. That Confluence is really, really meaningful for me. Over 25 years ago, I came out to Berkeley to do graduate work with some people here in the room tonight, including my now husband. And I worked in San Francisco with some other people in the room tonight, and we were working on safeguarding San Francisco's water supply. And it was an interesting time. We survived Y2K. One of the things I really loved to do when I lived out here was like take this excursion to the Richmond district, have lunch at Burma Superstar, and then I would walk over to this place called Toy Boat Dessert Cafe, and it had like these vintage 80s toys, but it was like one of the few places back then where you could get like a vegan ice cream on a cone like a normal person and just eat it. And then I'd go across the street to Green Apple Books. And so it was really special. I also remember there was someone at Green Apple Books many years ago who recommended a book to me. He said, like, the most beautiful description of monsoon rain in Burma was in this book. And I bought it, like, on the spot, just based on that description. So I'm really happy for those confluences of, like, spicy food, vegan desserts, and books. And we're going to talk about a lot more confluences today. So this is the book, Governing Bodies. I sort of describe it as like a lyrical reckoning of the way different bodies, whether they be human or animal or water, are controlled and liberated. And I've been working on this book for like 20 years, and it's like one of those things some of you have seen me, you're like, oh, what is your book about? And that was like the hardest question, for many writers to answer, but for me in particular. And I had recently asked my friend John, who has gotten basically everyone he knows to buy my book. And I was like, how do you describe my book? And he said, I usually say it's a book about water, and then he rambles for a while, and then he says it's a book about everything. And I think that everything is in the subtitle, a memoir, a confluence, a watershed. And it's sort of a confluence of art and science, of prose and poetry, and like kind of very deep personal grief and planetary grief. And it's also a watershed in that it's like sort of connecting all these different streams of thought between family history, the lives of animals, and the memory of water. And it's really, really amazing to be in this room, which I think is another watershed of all these different folks in my life and these different strands of family and writing and engineering, and new streams I haven't met yet, but I'm really happy to. I'm just going to read for a little bit and talk about the book. So I open the book with this passage. What you must understand is that when I tell you a story about my body, I cannot separate it from a story about water. And a story about water is also a story about family. And a story about family is rooted in the earth. And when I tell you about the earth, I must tell you about elephants and chimpanzees, cows and chickens, coral and trees, monkeys and bees. What harms one body harms all bodies. Like tributaries to the same river, our stories are entwined. And haven't seen it. My table of contents looks like this confluence of three rivers. In India, we call this the Triveni Sangam of Ganges, Yamuna, and the invisible Saraswati. And my beautiful niece, Lavanya Manikam, she designed this table of contents for me. And it was really the way I could picture this book in my head of like all of these things. And this came very, very late. I was working on this for 20 years, and like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I sketched out this table of contents and I showed it to my mom, and she's like, that's the Tribeni song coming, and it clicked, and it made it. It all was a way that I could connect it. And so the book is written in 3 parts. The first part is written to my Tata, my paternal grandfather, who was a civil engineer, like what I studied, and he worked in Burma in the 1920s and 30s for the British, and then quit to become a water diviner in Tamil Nadu in a place called Kalakurchi. And there's kind of this radical shift to more activism and towards the freedom movement. And the second part is written to my father, who passed away in 2003. And that was kind of like another origin story for this book, because I felt like when my father passed away, I was losing this connection to this history that I didn't know that much about then. And I also feel like I had this inheritance of, like, I think I inherited his love of animals and his love of words. And the third part, but really all the parts are into you, my dear readers. And I feel like that is more of like in this time of like reckoning with all of the personal and planetary crises that we're dealing with today. And maybe also kind of leaving the archive that I was looking for in like my father and my grandfather's generation. I'm going to read a little more from the beginning. And so this one is addressed to my grandfather and my papa. The Irrawaddy River in Burma is named after the mythical multi-trunked white elephant, Airavata, derived from the Sanskrit word Iravat, one who is produced from water. Our family history is also a story produced from water. If I were to trace your engineering career, Thapa, I'd follow it down the Irrawaddy. If I were to trace mine, I'd follow it from the streams in the Catskill Mountains through aqueducts and tunnels to New York City's pipes and faucets. My experience is also in the Yosemite Valley, Sierra Nevada snowbelt that gravity carries to San Francisco. It is on rooftops and in rain barrels in Cameroon, in buckets in the Sanaga River. Our lifetimes do not overlap, yet these lines of Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Brook are passed down in our family from you, my grandfather, to my father Abi, your youngest child, to me, his youngest daughter. And out again I curve and flow to join the brimming river, for men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. I know you became a water diviner in India after leaving Burma. I love that word, divining. If I can locate water, I think, I can trace it to you, to my father, and perhaps to me. But what am I really searching for? This desire to douse is a desire to restore some lost ancestral knowledge, some intergenerational memory. I studied groundwater hydrology in graduate school and oversaw the drilling of wells. It may sound strange that I would resort to a tree branch to locate water, uncover family history, or divine truths. But you are a civil engineer turned water diviner too. Maybe you are the one who understands. I picture myself holding the arms of a Y-shaped tree branch and feeling the force of water pulling me in one direction. Where will it take me? Can the divining ride guide me to all your engineering posts in Burma, from the Irrawaddy source at the Confluence in Myitsone down to the small lighthouse island where the Tavoy River empties into the Andaman Sea? Can the divining rod let me feel the blood rushing through your body, the passion and conviction of your decision to quit the British, rid yourself of material wealth, and pursue a life of service aligned with your ethics back in Tamil Nadu? Does it lead me to that bend in the Gomuki River where my father was born, or to where I leave his ashes swirling in the Ganges? Even without that ancestral rod, perhaps I have been divining water all these years as an engineer and activist. I follow the flow from source water reservoirs to the outfalls of wastewater treatment plants. I sketch the drainage patterns of rainwater in a forest of chimpanzees. Water is my guide along the plastic-choked Yamuna, carrying the blood of chickens and the excrement of no longer sacred cows. Water bodies, like our animal bodies, are poisoned and controlled. If I follow these rivers, can I divine how our bodies can carry these histories and still be liberated? This is my story produced from water, my body of work.
Thank you, Sangi, for that beautiful reading. I think I am going to adjust this a little bit.
Oh yeah, they're on the table.
That's better. Okay. Thank you, Sangu, so much for that beautiful reading. Thank you for this beautiful book. It's been such a joy to spend so much time with it recently. So I'm going to start with a slightly long question. I'm so moved by the scale of this finished book, which covers decades of your life, and I know took a couple decades to write, that brings together equally the knowledge of an engineer and a poet, that is a meditation on water, utopia, nonviolence, cruelty towards animals, the historical violence of colonialism and extractive capitalism on many ecosystems and beings, Tamil and the school of the Sangam eco-poets of the first century, grief, a personal grief of the loss of your father, grief on a planetary scale, veganism, and the profound joy of connection with other humans and also non-human animals. And it's about unbelievably more. I think that your friend was totally right when he said it's about everything. It somehow is about everything. So I wanted to say, like, I make this sound very dense, but actually this book is very dense in the most pleasurable way possible. This is a book that rewards a slow, deep, beautiful, rich attention, the kind of attention that I imagine you gave this work as you were writing it. So it is quite dense in the best way possible. And it's also deeply pleasurable, and it's to follow your mind, go to so many surprising places. So let's start at the beginning with this book. It's a very nonlinear book, but it did have an origin point, and I'd love to know, I said, I was being a little fancy, but this book is a watershed, as you said, that took decades to gather. So where's the origin point? Tell us the story of how this book came to be. And also you spoke a little bit briefly about the watershed and the confluence. I knew that this previous subtitle of this book was a satana, and it's a concept you talk about in the book. So if you want to introduce it that way too, we would love to hear.
Sure. Thank you for that very generous, gorgeous introduction. So also in the very beginning of the book, I have a little, this column, this Indian artwork, and yes, Shruti has one on her art. And the words begin again. And I feel like this book is a book about everything, but it's also a book about beginnings. There's a lot of different beginnings to the story, and I felt I kept beginning again. And I think having the book shaped like a river, I felt like, water coursing through a river, and every time I returned, I'm different and the river is different. And I felt that was very much like this process. So I do think that the one origin point is when my father passed away, and I just had all these questions, and we brought his ashes to the river Ganga. And I wrote an email to friends back home about this experience. And at the time I wasn't a writer, I was just grieving. And I wrote, our journey began in North India, but the story really begins in South India in a place called Kalaburchi, where my father was born. And that line was in that email, and it's in this. And so I think that became sort of the search for Kalaburchi. And so I think one of the origins was that. And Kalaburchi, in the book, it sort of evolves in each of the parts of what it is or what I think it is. And I think it's a place that's both like real and imagined. And it's different for, like, everybody has a Kalaburchi. So I think I was trying to figure out what my Kalaburchi is. And so there were different beginnings, like to even uncover all of this history when I was losing many of that generation who still had knowledge of that. And I would hear pieces of what my grandfather did in Burma. And I felt like Burma was the origin story to Kalaburchi. Like, I wanted to know what happened in Burma that my grandfather quit to make Kalaburchi. So I think that was a quest that I was getting a lot of different pieces of information that didn't add up, and people were like, well, if you really want to go, you have to go to the British Library in London. And it was like 10 years after my father passed away, I got a grant to go there. And then it's like really overwhelming, like this is like the archives of an empire, and like how am I going to find my grandfather in this? But there was like this record of civil servants, and I didn't know what year he was, I didn't know, and it was just like a bit of trial and error. And then I found him, and that was like amazing to see like his name in a book. But then there's all these things that aren't in the book, you know? So I got his civil service record, which is amazing, which is the most I ever knew about him. But then I was also using the archive to interrogate the archive about what's not in there and what questions remained. So I felt like that was like another beginning where I got this. And then I had gone to Burma with that same grant to trace these footsteps. And I was also looking to actually get to Calabrici because it was this homeland of my father and his siblings. But I think in 1989 it was sold off. And I was able to get one of my uncles to bring me there. And that comes, maybe like halfway through the book, I found it. So I feel like there was like a turn in the book. And then I kind of realized, because I think when you work on a book for this long, it's like this relationship you have, and it keeps teaching you what it is. And I think for a long time, and it's called like Governing Bodies, but like my third part is called Ungovernable Bodies, and I had to learn to let the book teach me what it was. And I think at that moment I realized looking for Calabrici was like looking for knowledges that were almost lost, and like trying to reclaim knowledges that are almost lost. So I felt like this was like that journey of beginning again and again to this. And then I think realizing it was a confluence, and all water flows into another big confluence. I think all of that really made a lot of sense to how I was thinking about the book.
This is making me very emotional, Sangu, for some reason. I feel so moved by that. That's really beautiful. Wow, I wasn't expecting to be so moved. So you can tell me if you feel like you've already answered this, but as we've said, that this book covers like a lot of ground, and yet it does have a form. It has a through line. And I'm curious, with a book that is traveling so non-linearly in so many directions, can you tell us about the process of pouring this book into the form that it currently is? It's a real book that you can read, and it's not like, there's so much, but it's totally comprehensible. There's so many connections you're making, but it's comprehensible. It has a real center and a weight in it. So can you talk about finding that form in that center and how that came to be, if you don't feel like you already talked about it just now?
No, I mean, I think what I realized too, again, I had to let the book teach me what it is. Mm-hmm. And again, there's like a lot of like substitution happening where I want to learn how to water divine, and that's actually like how Shruti and I got connected. I'll just share that story real quick, because I had published an excerpt of this in a journal several years ago of that first chapter, and I didn't know Shruti at the time, but she read the essay and she shared it with her father, and her father reached out to me saying, because I had a line about like wanting to learn how to water divine, and all I need is a Y-shaped branch and someone to teach me. And so he volunteered. He's like, I can teach you. And that was, I don't know, maybe 2019 or something. The pandemic happened, and I didn't know when I was going to come here, but then I did it on Zoom. And so there's like part of this book that I write about there of having these lessons. But when I was listening to Sanjay, Sruti's father, talk about water divining, it sounded like poetry to me, and it sounded like this intuition I had about flow in the book. So whether or not I was divining water, I think I was divining the flow in the book, and writers talk about plot, but I think each of the sections has like this different flow regime. I think the first part is almost like passing of a baton, like, in these reaches. I think the second part is like kind of playful and like more juxtaposition, and there's like eddies, I don't know. And then I think the third part is also like in the time it took to make this book. I think in the first part, you're kind of like making this argument that these things are connected. And I think by the time you get to the third part, it really is this confluence, and we're in this moment where it is like everything everywhere all at once, and it's kind of undeniable. And I think we walk through the pandemic during that time period too, and you have like the rallying cry of I can't breathe, and it could be applying to George Floyd, it could be applying to COVID, and it could be like all the wildfires. And so I feel like that is the regime in the third part of it. I also think what I discovered in this, because I thought it was about my grandfather and I as engineers, but I think it's really about my father and I as poets, and I didn't know I was a poet. But then I realized what poetry offered to be able to hold all of these multiple truths and distill it. And so I think that was also a key part of how the book holds, and like having like words do a lot of labor to connect these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like one of the great gifts of this book is that it translates some concepts in engineering. You write about soil and the memory of soil in a way that I imagine you learned it in a very technical way.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're able to write very lyrically, but also very like accurately about that. So you can feel both of those so strongly in this book. And I'm going to ask you a question about engineering. There's this moment in the book, kind of early on, where you're in Cameroon. You were a graduate student in Berkeley, and you had decided between taking this like more in line with your engineering internship, your study, and you decided to go to Cameroon for the summer and volunteer at a shelter for chimps. And you work with these wonderful little orphaned chimps called small smalls. And while you're there, you meet up with an alum from UC Berkeley who was there to working as an engineer on the pipeline in Cameroon. And you sort of don't say it like this, so you can modify what I say, but you can see that there's in that scene of you looking at his work, there's a sort of feeling of what are you doing? Like there's this beautiful land, and he's bragging about how he's lifting up the quality of life, and there's all these wonderful safeguards, and you think like, well, there wouldn't need to be safeguards if we didn't build this pipeline here. So there's a feeling of violence there, of seeing what engineering, like that, this like violence through engineering sort of. Yeah. And then on the other end of that, I think of your work now as an engineer, and you're working to mitigate climate change. You're going to all these beautiful wild spaces, like where the land meets the water in New York, and thinking through how to make this city sustainable through climate change. And you shared with me that somebody on your team had said, if you're on the side of water, water always wins.
Yes.
And there's this beautiful way. So there's, on the one hand, you have this kind of violence of working against the land, and on the other side, or working against these natural forces. And on the other hand, you have engineering as a way of working with these elements, working with water, working with land, and how powerful that is, that water always wins. So I wanted to ask you if you wanted to talk about what your work as an engineer in this iteration has taught you about ahimsa, nonviolence, which is an important concept in your book, and anything you wanted to talk about around your work as an engineer and how it relates to the concepts you talk about in the book. And you also do talk about your work as an engineer in the book.
Yeah, thank you. I think for a long time I was trying to figure out like how to be an engineer aligned with my values and my ethics. And I was working in San Francisco with these lovely people, and done, I took a leave of absence to go to Cameroon, and they needed an engineer to work on like drainage issues and things like that. So it was kind of like my ticket into the activism, which I think was like my grandfather's ticket into activism too, was engineering and being able to provide water. And I think water is a through line in my work. And then where I was situated, there was this Chad Cameroon pipeline that was being built by Exxon, and we had met an engineer who was very nice. But he was actually friends with Bonaparte and Mitchell, who wrote this paper on San Francisco Bay mud that we might know. And yeah, I was just trying to figure out like what are the applications of this work. And I think in that chapter, because I was writing about these small smalls and I was writing about these big bigs, which are like big oil, and trying to figure out like how to do work on behalf of the small smalls and not the big bigs. And I think my career has taken a circular like sometimes I'm doing more engineering, sometimes I'm doing more writing or activism, and then I feel like the book was the place I could put all the parts of me in. But I am back in public service in water for New York City, and I'm in a really interesting role. We have this ability to think about climate change and think about like how we can preserve these old drainage corridors, because right now with climate change everywhere we're experiencing these like, really high intensity storms really quickly that overwhelm our existing infrastructure. And I'm trying to look at like how we carve space for water and can kind of reintroduce these drainage corridors. And once you do that, you end up bringing in plants and you bring in animals. And one of the coolest things that I learned, because I joined this role after pretty much completing this book, is like this restoration of this. One of our sites was to address the local flooding problem, but really what ended up happening is like we're restoring this like migratory pathway of the American glass eel, and they're like born in the Sargasso Sea, and they're born orphans, and they're tiny, and they catch a hot current up the Atlantic, and then during some new moon they know to like leave the ocean and join a freshwater creek on Staten Island, and they know to do that because that's like where their ancestors used to go. And by restoring this local creek and this corridor, we're able to restore that, and that is like amazing. So I'm thinking about like those kind of possibilities in the work now as that kind of restoration.
Yeah, that is extremely cool. And speaking of animals, there are so many. This book is rich, is teeming with animals. I was so struck by your depictions of non-human animals in this book. There's chickens and chimps and dogs and bees and elephants and even more animals. And I felt your characterization of all the animals in the roles, large and small, was to see them in their ways of being and communicating as sentient and deeply feeling, and also vulnerable to human malice, but not helpless, like with agency, and certainly not lesser than human animals. And I know we've both been interested in animal cognition and consciousness, and I'm wondering if you just wanted to tell us about the animals in the book, either just you wanted to talk about some of your favorite animals that are in this book, or if you wanted to tell us about what it was like to write about them in this very specific way, and if there's any like things that you decided when you were depicting these animals, how to depict them in this way where you respected their difference but also their agency.
Yeah, I love that question. And as Car mentioned, I had started this thing called the Literary Animal Project, and I'm still evolving on what it is, but one of the things I'm really interested in is like how we talk about animals on the page more so than just metaphors or symbols or mirrors, and how they have agency on the page, and personhood. And I was doing my style guide. Your copy editor gives you a style guide for the book, and I had like my rules, and I'm like, there's no it's, or I'm going to assign a personal pronoun. And then, another beginning was when I had this experience in Washington State, meeting some of the chimpanzees who acquired American Sign Language. And I kind of think that they're kind of poets too. And because it was really interesting is because they would learn words, but then they would make new words by compounding two together. So like for Christmas, they would put candy on a tree, so they called it Sweet Tree. And like watermelon was candy drink, which is kind of, cool. And going to the bathroom, going potty was dirty good. And then I would play with that, because I would talk about colonialism and I call it dirty bad. And there were these stories, and I think one of the most powerful ones was a story about Washoe, who, scientists did all these terrible things to animals, and they were also trying to see if she would pass this on to the next generation, and she had suffered multiple losses but adopted a chimpanzee, but she had this sense of understanding grief of human going through a very similar experience of the losses that she had experienced. And she signed, cry, please person, hug, and I feel like that is like the most perfect response to someone going through that grief. And so that's sort of a recurring, motif. So trying to use their words too. And then, there's like the animals, like I visit slaughterhouses in India and like these really harsh factory conditions for eggs and cows. And, trying to figure out how to write about those places that I don't want to be in myself, and how do I keep the reader there, and the sort of balance between. So I think I thought a lot about having space and generosity for my reader to take in all of this, because it is a lot. So I think with the flow and with my little table of contents and rivers, there's these little like rock islands. And I kind of think of some of them as these like poetic passages of pause, So I think that was one of the things I was thinking about too, of like how to honor their lives and the scale of the problem, but not have my reader shut down, or turn away. Yeah.
Well, I think that I have time for one more question before we go to Q&A. So I have like 7 more entries, but we'll just have to live in the mystery of not having those questions answered. So this book is in many ways about the universe of care you are entangled with animals, with family, with community, with the environment. Through your work as infrastructure, working on infrastructure as care work, a phrase that you shared with me recently, and through writing itself. So I wanted to ask you, how has writing this book and through many painful experiences, and writing through the grief of many painful experiences, clarified or redefined your understanding of care? What has this book taught you about care?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great way of thinking of how the writing process. I think as writers, we often are like hard on ourselves, and I think if we reframe it as like, how do we care for these stories? It's like it's gentler to us and like better to our stories, But yeah, I am thinking a lot. There is this other playwright in New York. She was doing this play called Flood Sense or Auntie, and it was about like flooding and aunties, and how aunties, protect a community. And I was like, oh, aunties are infrastructure too. Like both thinking about aunties as infrastructure and infrastructure as care work. So yeah, and about invisible labor. It's like all this invisible labor and care. So I think in doing this book, I think it's also sort of like about making visible some of those invisible labors of care.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so I'll let you set us up, actually.
Okay, we're gonna have a Q&A, but because this is a watershed and you guys are amazing people, we thought we'd give you like a minute to just like talk amongst yourselves, like find someone maybe you don't know, and just if there's something that we talked about that resonated or why you came here tonight. It's just a few minutes, even if you're an introvert, it should be painless. And then we'll come back and it'll be great, and you can ask us whatever you want to ask us. So just a minute, a few minutes of pause. So if you want to find someone, turn to someone, and just make a friend. But don't leave.
So how did you know what was your put together at working?
No. Sandra used to work at the same firm as we did. She worked in my group as an engineer. In San Francisco. So, and then we connected on our love of animals. So,
the animals this project.
Yeah. She worked in
I've been wondering now, but she always also with me and it's like, are you a colleague connected with water? Was also very concerned about the water issue.
I don't know. I think she was working in the soil. I know. Yeah, and she came to work for her family, so I don't know. But I'm very interested to read the book. I mean, it sounds like the scale is... Are you interested in the book? Do you think you're gonna?
The book.
Okay, come back to us now. Now we can have a Q&A. Oh, it's nice that you're enjoying this so much. You don't want to stop though. And you're going to come back now. Everybody stop talking. It's very nice. We can all get each other's numbers and be friends with each other. It's really great. Okay, so we've been talking and maybe some questions have come up. So if anybody has any questions, oh yes.
I always have questions.
Oh great.
You can just choose to ignore them. So I was just amazed hearing about this work and the way a lot of you are describing a lot of it, makes me I'm already feeling a lot of despair at what's going on in the world today, even with what's going on currently. The whole thing is just like, and then I hear your discussion, and I haven't read your book. So I was just wondering, given all your various backgrounds as an engineer and an activist, is the book fairly hopeful? Or how hopeful are you? I mean, I would hope for my niece and their generations that they don't do what our generation did to the planet, actually. And also this whole idea that, we all start out with all this activism, and you're a young engineer and you want to do all this, and then capitalism and profit and all that gets in the way. So, how do you deal with that? And so are you hopeful, and kind of what message would you give the young people saying, okay, this is maybe the few things you can do to not feel so despair?
Kar, should I repeat the question? Yeah, okay. I will repeat for our online audience.
Okay.
So the question is, I'm just distilling it, is this a hopeful book? Do you have hope? And what would you tell young people, young engineers? That was also actually my question, though it was not phrased, yes, this is a hopeful book, but I was going to ask you, what are the ways you, hope is a discipline, we know. So where are the ways that you find hope in this work and in this book?
Yeah, I think writing this book, I was kind of looking for that guide because it is the same questions. And again, while it wasn't written yesterday, or at this particular moment, there was like a lot of previous moments that are variations on the theme of what is happening today. So in that time, and again, when we were all here, in the early 2000s, and we had, Barbara Lee speaks for me, and, we were dealing with like the erasure and eradication of truth, all of these things, like their earlier entry points into that. And I think in this book, I was also searching for like these longer lineages of nonviolence going back a long time. And whether it's hopeful or not hopeful, because I feel like I felt a lot of solidarity looking in the archive and finding, these lineages of nonviolent thought. And I guess there's one way of looking at it, it's like we're still fighting the same things. And the other way is like, in any moment, there's going to be these oppressive forces and the people fighting those oppressive forces, and that we still are here, and haven't been erased. So I think that's part of that reclaiming of like almost lost knowledges. So I think that is where maybe concentrating some of these energies are. And I think in the book there's all these like meditations on various concepts, like one is truth or satya, and different thinkers like going back to truth as like the first step, like even like Tolstoy, like the first step is like, don't lie to myself, and however far I am from where I want to be, and thinking of various words around like ahimsa or nonviolence. And I think the third word or concept that I meditate on in the book is this water activist in Burma, Nini, shared with me. She called it Sangamithra, which is like a spiritual friend or coworker, and how when two people are meditating side by side, it's more powerful than doing. Those are the things that I'm trying to orient myself to. But I also just want to acknowledge that this moment is particularly very oppressive, and we're being bombarded every second. And so I'm trying to figure out how to carve space. I will say one other thing. I also talk about this book, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, and there's like an amazing line at the very end of it where it's this conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, and Marco Polo is describing all these cities of empire, and they're kind of getting darker and darker, and there was this futility of like, what's the point? We're just like hurtling towards this inferno, and I guess Marco Polo character says like, if there is an inferno, it's not like something that's to come. It's the inferno of like what we're living in right now. But there's two ways to escape suffering it. Like one is like become a part of it, so you don't even recognize it, which is what most often happens. And then the second is to like be really vigilant and find out who and what amongst the inferno are not the inferno, and to give that space and make that endure. And so that also felt like, when I read those lines, like I have them like sort of taped, of just trying to figure out. And it's helpful in a lot of situations that are not as dire, but you can be like, oh, that's the inferno, I don't want to do that, and then, but it gives you clarity. And then, so that's Tijana.
So I'm about 100 pages in, and I knew it was going to be an epic book, but it's just so big, and I'm wondering your process for organizing. Are there sticky notes? Are there little flashcards? Is there Scrivener? Do you have folders, binders? Like, how did you do this, and how, like, did the pieces sort of converge on their own? Or did you think you were going to make it a certain way, and then the pieces, they just do what they want?
Yeah, I think they do what they want.
Let me say the question again for our
yes,
audience,
yes.
and I will just distill it to a question about process and how you organize so many disparate thoughts in a technical way, like where they're post-its.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a massive amount of information, and I did use Scrivener, but I don't think I used it the right way, because I think Scrivener, you could have a file and you could hold everything in it. You could have your research materials, your drafts. It's really helpful to move things around, so you can have your manuscript and divide it into chunks, and it's very easy to just be like, oh, I should move this here without having to like cut 20 pages and relocate it in Word or whatever, and that's like annoying. This book has a lot of echoes, so it's also really nice to do like the split screen feature in Scrivener. So if you are writing about something on 3 and it comes on page 70, you can see it, and make sure that the next one feels like an echo and not like a duplication. And you can also pull up like your source material, like my grandfather's like file, and my text to make sure I'm like getting the words right. But I would get so overwhelmed by my Scriveners, so I have like many Scriveners, which I don't think is like the approach. I think it's supposed to be like it should be your one thing, but I would get too overwhelmed and then like start a smaller one. The other thing I would do, like in like the second part of my book, I cut up all the pieces, like I had, and then I put them on the floor, and like I walked around and I moved them, but I had little index cards with like little notes of like, oh, this is about this, and I colored them so I could kind of visually see like, oh, it's like blue, pink, blue, you know, and I did a lot of work on the subway, you know, or trains, and so I had like passes. So like sometimes like it was really helpful for me to edit something like on a journey and come back and just focus on like one particular element during that ride. And I also would listen, you know, like in an editing thing, like I would try to do some like text to speech thing so I could hear it. Yeah, there's a lot.
I am so curious about when you decided you were done with the book, and if you had an editor looking at it, and it seems like such a deeply personal book, that how somebody, if you had help from once you were done, or how you knew you were done, and how the process of getting it published.
So the question is, how did you know you were done? And talking about the process of getting it published.
Yeah. It is a good question, because I think I talk a lot about beginning over and over again, and then it's like, how do you know you're done? And I'll start on the publishing end first, because it was also a little backwards. Because again, like over the years, like I had done, my father passed away in 2003. I quit my job to go work at like a animal rights, social justice magazine. And I think that was like me becoming a writer, and like thinking about all these issues and the connections. And then when that magazine closed, I was going back to full-time where we met, right? But I did an MFA in creative writing at night. So I had done like a thesis as part of that, which is kind of also an entry point of the book. And then over the years, I was just doing more research and revising it. And every time I learned something, it changed the book. But I had to honor that. Like I couldn't be like, oh, I don't want to, you know? And I think like once I realized it was a Confluence, and once I saw all the parts, and once I did all these passes on the train and listening to it and make sure I got the sound right, it was really intuitive. And I have my friend Leslie, you know, she has this word undeniable, and I think that was like a thing. It was undeniable that I had done the work. But it did feel, when it was done, I had normally, like, you're supposed to, like, go to an agent, and then the agent sells the book to a publisher. And I had kind of the reverse, where a friend had recommended me for this writing thing, and one of the judges read 10 pages of my book and was like, oh, are you working on a book? I think I'd be a good home for it. And then I'd send her, like, you know, a manuscript like maybe a year later, and they were interested. And then I got the agent to negotiate the process. But yeah, but then it's like done, but then it goes through all these other copy, fact, this, and then it's really done, and you can't do anything, and it feels really weird. But I feel good. Like I don't have any regrets right now, or like, which is good.
We have time for one final question. Sangi, you should choose the question. Oh, yes, there's.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, was there a professor or maybe one or more that had a profound influence on your thought process, the way the story unfolded?
Yeah, so when I studied at Hunter College, there's my professor, Louise DeSalvo, who passed away in 2018. But she was a professor of memoir, and I think she really was really great about changing like what we think about memoir and the possibility of memoir and the expansiveness of memoir, like as sort of like a moral and ethical project, and also as like a corrective to history. And so I really appreciated, and she also really talked a lot about the creative process. So I think both in terms of how you structure yourself as a writer and like carve space in your day. And she came from like really working class background, so she was really like interested in like work, you know, and like what does the work look like? How do I show up? How do I carve this space? And so all of that was really helpful in trying to figuring out how to have a writing life. Hi, Ravi.
I have one question. Being an engineer, having studied engineering, there's a very structured way of how we need to work scientifically and all the related elements. But also the fact that in Hinduism we have a spiritual way of looking at things involving the nature. We have a lot of, influence from your father and family and so. So when you wrote the book, how do you balance the two? On the one side, you studied engineering, a very good graduate school with a lot of scientific information being put in, then your spiritual side of influence and people, that kind of thing makes your writing in a different way that makes it more acceptable to your ethics or your style of thinking.
This is a question about reconciling the background, the scientific background and engineering thinking with like Hinduism, spirituality, other ways of knowing and being, how you reconcile those two as you were writing.
Yeah, and I think for a long time I felt like I had living these two lives. Like I would have like a work life and outside of work life, and I really tried to integrate them, but also trying to rethink what we think about science. And even like when I was learning about like the Tamil Sangam poets, like these were poets who knew more about the natural world that like Western science is barely understanding right now. Like they were writing about animal grief, they're writing about eco grief, and concepts that we're just now trying to understand. So, and I think in all of our like ancient languages too, there's so much knowledge of the natural world embedded in it. So when I was learning about Tamil and like all this waterness and this ecological vocabulary, so I'm trying to figure out how we don't have these divisions or these silos, because I think we are more connected than we realize.
Well, that's a very beautiful note to end on. Thank you, Sangu. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. I believe that Sangu is going to be willing and joyously wanting to sign books.
It's true. Can we give one more hand for Shruti Swamy? Thank you so much to you both. Shruti, thank you as always for reading so closely and being so thoughtful. I always know that you're going to be like a fabulous, really conversation partner. And Sangu, thank you. I'm so glad we got to be a part of this book's journey. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this very long, hard-won endeavor. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I'm so glad to have you here. I will be brief. We have books available by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. And they will be signing back here. So you can find them there, bring them back here to have them signed. Please do make yourselves comfortable and take a look around. We have other books if you want to look at those too. And may we know the difference between the inferno and what is not the inferno.
If anything, that's what you need to come away with.
Absolutely. I will leave it there. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pick up a copy of Italo Calvinism.
Yes. So thank you so much, folks. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you.